wow, there's so many great sessions there. I have to say, I'm just so impressed what people are presenting. Woo, amazing. I hope you are impressed as well, because I'm just like, woo, this is so cool. Well, our next guest was a guy that Roger and I met in San Mateo for 2 years ago when we were there in May to see the largest maker fair in the world. So Roger and I, we went around with our Oslo Mini Maker Fair T-shirt to kind of just, promote the event. I don't know. But then suddenly this guy came up and he said, you're from Oslo, from Norway, and you made a maker fair. Wow, that's really great. And that was Espen. It's really cool. So nice to have him here. He came all the way from San Francisco and to give this talk here. And I'm really looking forward to this. He's going to tell about you start the campaign, you get your funding from Kickstarting, but then you start to do, maybe you have to produce like 1,000 or a few thousand units. How can you do that? Can you actually use the 3D printer for that?
Yep.
So, Espen,
I just realized this is like automatically scrolling. Let me get that back. Oh, I'm done. Thank you.
Okay.
So, okay, let's see if we can do this. Maybe like this. Okay. Cool. Hello, my name is Espen. I just want to give a shout out. That was actually awesome. I love the elephant, by the way. That's one of the cooler things I've seen in quite some time. 3D printers, yay. How many of you guys have a 3D printer, just to give me some idea? Yeah, I would expect you to pick up your hand. Good. More than one as well, perhaps. So I think that there's a really, really interesting thing that's been happening with 3D printing over the last couple of years. And if you look at it from our point of view, we started out in January of 2012, just 4 guys in a hackerspace in San Francisco. And Eric was showing the projection of the plywood machines, or like the metal frame and plywood machine, and then next. And I think we've kind of gone through a similar history. There's something that annoys me a little bit at the moment as well, which is there's a lot of hype around 3D printing. And I just want to, I use these pictures because I love them and hate them at the same time. Because you got this like beautiful, everything is working fine. And she's holding this mug, but I bet you that mug is printed in PLA. And that means that it'll melt the moment you put hot water into it. And also, if it was printed in ABS, that would be slightly toxic, so it's not so good. So the reality is slightly different in many ways. And I would actually say that my experience with the rate of technology and the rate of reliability in the industry is incredible. Just within the last couple of months, the print quality has gone up significantly. I think you'll recognize that as well. But I like to tell my wife that the key to happiness is lower expectations. She doesn't quite buy that, but I think that's kind of what I want to say with part of this as well. And the reason I think that's important is because 5 years ago, a lot of the patents in the industry expired, and everyone just kind of like took off. And I think that there are a lot of people about to fall now. There's some 200 companies in the 3D printing space at this point. And it's easy to make a 3D printer. It's hard to make a good 3D printer. And so, if you look at the Gartner hype cycle, this is probably one of my favorite tools at the moment. I think we're kind of heading rapidly into the trough of disillusionment when it comes to 3D printing, because I think there are a lot of particularly lower-end units that are going to be gathering dust. And the reason I'm concerned about that is because I think that it's something that we have a responsibility to embrace and accept, and then move it through the trough of disillusionment as quickly as possible and into something that's maybe a little bit more enlightened. But in the meantime, we're basically going to be in some sort of situation where a lot of the 3D printing companies out there are going to be struggling. I've been thinking about that a long time, and so I looked at our own user base, and I discovered about 8 months ago that 1 out of 10 of our users have created their own company or are running their own startup using our 3D printer as their primary tool. Just to put that in context, right now, percentage-wise, we are creating more companies than most business schools. And I think that speaks to the maker movement, right? And just case in point here, Henry and his dad Caleb, they were one of our early adopters. They've created this campaign on Kickstarter, which was the Annoyinator, which is basically a speaker for the iPhone, and it gets really annoying very quickly, which is why they call it the Annoyinator. But they launched and they got like a small successful campaign, and Henry now I think he's 13, 14. He's now running his own little small business. And more of our customers are starting to do that. And it made me think, maybe there's a gap in the system. Maybe there's something missing between having that desktop unit and going from idea to object. And it's been talked about earlier today as well. There's what happens once you've done that campaign. Where do you go after you've just done this $100,000 Kickstarter? Now, how do you get into production? And maybe it's possible to actually use the same tools at low volume manufacturing. And so that's what I want to talk a little bit about. So this is Dan Walters. I brought some show and tell items, bear with me. Dan makes resin for the aerospace industry, amongst other things. So he makes these bags. And basically what it is it's a glue it's a two-part glue that solidifies when you combine it. And he has these dividers that keep the two components apart. Now, if he was to go and make these little dividers using a traditional injection molding system, he would actually run into some problems, namely that the cost to do them is quite high because you have to pay for the molds. So you're looking at easily $1,500 or $2,000 just to get the molds done. And if you're doing just $600 or $800 or something, like you would at the Kickstarter campaign where you're doing a small production run, that becomes too expensive. And so, with 3D printing, he's able to he bought 3D printers and printed for a week, and then he made 800 of these. And it saved him a lot of money. In fact, he calculated doing it the normal way he does it is about $50,000. Doing it with our system, it was about $5,000. So I think that there's a really interesting trend, and I think that as 3D printer manufacturers, there's actually an opportunity here as well. Just to give you an idea, this is a traditional injection molding system. You basically have to make those molds, which for complex systems gets really expensive really quickly. But of course, if you 3D print them instead, it can get a lot easier. And just to run through some numbers really quickly, we kind of looked at some different components. And it turns out that for sub-1,000 unit production, you can actually do that really efficiently. So the good news here to the maker movement is that the tools that let you go from idea to object can also help you go from prototype to product and into full production. And better yet, there are some things that you just can't do with traditional injection molding, and so it becomes a complementary thing. If I was to try to injection mold this, I would have a really hard time doing that. But I can do it with 3D printing. So I just wanted to share this because I knew you were going to talk about it. This is John. He is part of your project, or the Enable project. And I love this project. It's such a cool project. And so for Halloween, we've been looking at other add-ons that people can make as well. And there was a request to do as many of these as possible. And it might have actually been for the hospital thing you were talking about. But we did 20 in literally 2 days because we had a cluster of 3D printers that we could do that with. And so you go from just doing that desktop thing to actually having a cluster. And at that point, you suddenly have production, low-volume production capabilities. We've built walls and stuff as well. This is all built on our desktop 3D printer. And it's literally, I think, something like a week's worth of printing, but on 15 printers. So you can do that sort of thing very quickly and elegantly. So print farms. I think that's a really, really interesting new development. And as a tool for makerspaces, I think that's the sort of thing that can really empower entrepreneurs. And a big part of that is being actually able to connect the printers to the internet, because so we've been looking at this for a couple of months, remember. So one of the big things that we looked at, if you're going to do print farms, what is it that you need in order to be able to do that successfully? One of them is, you can't have a laptop connected or extra units connected to every single 3D printer because it increases your costs. So we made our 3D printers wireless. We did some other things as well. We developed an API and designed it for production. So one of the big things is, it's a fully modular system. So you can swap out things as well, meaning that if things on your production line stop, you can just quickly replace those parts using uptime kits. So just to give you an idea of this space that I talked about, you have these $60,000 machines. But for $60,000, Eric or I can sell you 20 of our printers, and you'll have 20x or 10x output. And so there's a really interesting thing here where if you start getting into print farms, a lot of the things that we can do as manufacturers is actually help entrepreneurs and makers go from having built a couple of things and then seeing that your friends want them and your friend's friend want them, and then instead of having to go to China and make a bet on 10,000 units and hoping you can sell 8,000 of them, you can just keep on producing using 3D printers. And I think that there are some big companies as well that are looking at that space. And I won't tell you which one is 3D Systems and which one is Stratasys, but they're up there. But I think, and the reason I think it's interesting is because they've been in this space for like 30 years. But they haven't done the distributed platform. And I think that's the powerful thing. And it's coming out from the grassroots, from the RepRap movement. So we're going to run fast and hard to kind of get into this space. And we're launching some stuff next week as well. But we don't want to do it alone. And so we looked at some good advice. Always be yourself. Unless you can be Batman, then always be Batman. And so we've decided to be Batman. And we launched the world's largest 3D technology cluster under one roof last week. Unfortunately, President Obama was actually supposed to be there. There was a 75% chance that he would make it, and then he got delayed in Washington, so he couldn't be there. But we had 2 members of Congress, and last Thursday I was standing in an old Ford plant just south of Oakland Airport with 2 members of Congress and American flags behind me. Being Norwegian, that was kind of surreal. And we had the congressional seal with the eagle on the podium, and I was saying, we are bringing jobs to America. Because it's true. We are building machines that are building jobs. And I think that's worth thinking about. So what we've done is, we don't want to do this alone. We want to connect in with lots of different companies. And we now have 12 companies, all non-competing, in a single cluster under one roof in San Leandro. And the reason I think that is powerful is because it's not just about going it alone anymore. It's about connecting all of these different services. So, it's about scanning, it's about modeling, it's about molding, it's about print farms, and desktop printing kind of holds a lot of that together. And it's a tool. It's a very, very powerful tool. So, I think that's the biggest sort of like and most powerful element in all this. And what we're seeing is that, and I want to just show you some more cases as well, because what we're seeing is that there's a real sort of like connectivity in the maker movement. And all of these 3D printing manufacturers coming online, we've counted somewhere south of 200 different companies at this point. But they're all doing similar things. And I really genuinely don't see them as competitors, because we're all developing this wonderful technology that's going out there. And quite frankly, the market is huge. There's nothing to stop us from going slightly different ways. So we are focusing in on really being able to do print farms very well. And what we're seeing is that there's kind of like this formula, which is like 3D printing plus X equals a business. And just to give you a case in point, so I did this for this is my dad. I scanned his face and turned him into a plastic garden gnome for his 70th birthday. And I did one, and then suddenly all my friends and my family wants them. And we've seen this like pattern happen again and again and again. Like one of our users will buy a 3D printer from us. They'll do something silly, like a Pokemon, like one of our customers, she made like a little Pokemon Pikachu vase. And she took a 3D model of a Pokemon, and she basically made a hole in it and stuck a plant in it. And she made the front page of Reddit literally 2 days after having bought the 3D printer, right? And then it's kind of like, okay, so you've put the plant in some plastic, and now you have a product. But then the question is, well, how do you go from there to actually having a viable business? And that's where I think that there's real potential to kind of like help build that. Same with the garden gnome. Just to give you some other cases as well. We've been working with one of our partners at this technology cluster we've made. So we call the technology cluster Bay Area Advanced Manufacturers, or BAM for short, because we're in America. And one of our partners, they've been doing 3D printed service components, and then they'll take the plastic part and basically investment cost it and turn it into metal. And the reason that's really, really powerful is this part, if I were to make it in a traditional way, would cost about $2,000 just in tool pathing. But it cost me literally $6 to print. Actually, a little bit less. Turning it into metal, now again, if I was to cut it, it would be around $2,000. It costs us $60. And that includes the time and the materials and everything, because it's a known technology. So there's a real potential for local makerspaces, for local hubs, to not just help people go from idea to object, but I think take it to that next step as well, and turn it from prototype into full production. And if I could leave you guys with one thought, it would be exactly that there's a real opportunity here in Norway and elsewhere in the world to really bring manufacturing back locally as well. So I think that there's an opportunity there to kind of like seize our inner entrepreneurs, or Reodor Felgen is kind of like my Norwegian sort of gründer. And I think that there's a real opportunity there to kind of not just look at what we're doing individually, but connect the dots in terms of building out makerspaces, products, services that actually connect and help young companies go from prototype to product. So I think I'm going to leave you guys with that. I have time for some questions, if we want to do some questions, or do you want to go into the panel? Yeah? Questions? Erik, I want to hear what you say. Yeah. Yeah, so the question is whether we created modularity in the printhead to make it easy to swap out. So one of the things that we've run into is that the thing that breaks the most in the printer is the printhead, because you get nozzle clogs. Now, we actually have a very high sort of like reliability in the printhead because we have a different unique nozzle design. We can talk about that later, but the big thing there is we realized very early on that, particularly for novice users where they might be doing things that counteract settings or whatever, if you do get the clog, it's really, really painful. I'll use the Makerbot as an example, neutral third ground. But the Makerbot's printhead, they have a quick release printhead, but that's a $300 replacement part, right? Our needle extruder costs $3 to replace. And it's a single screw. You don't have to do anything more than that. And so, we've been really thinking about it from the point of view for the production, which is it's about uptime. no one cares about the 3D printers. They care about the objects in their hand at the end of the day. And so the more invisible we can become, the more reliable we can become, the better it is. So I think that's a really, really powerful sort of element in it. And we've done the same with all of the wiring, with the E-tray. Everything's easy to swap out. And part of it as well is, we save a lot of costs on tech support because we can just ship those modules out and the customers can put them in really easily. But also you can buy uptime kits from us where we have those replacement parts on hand. So if you're on the deadline, you need to deliver something really quickly, you can just put those, have those parts and put them in and keep on doing. And for the record, we have a 3% mechanical failure rate at the moment. Just to put that in context, word of mouth right now is that Makerbot has a 30% mechanical failure rate. So I think there's some interesting stuff there. Yes? Yeah. Yeah, so that's the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, get ready for the Hunger Games stuff. So I think that you are right. I think that may come. But I think that, the bloodbath is going to be more towards the people that are competing for the same spaces. And there's plenty of space if you're a little bit creative and look for the different domains. So, just to give you an idea, here in Norway, for instance, you've got the shipping sector and the offshore sector. And they require totally, slightly different tools than you might do for, architecture or design or engineering. But what I'm seeing with a lot of the printers on the market, the vast majority of them, and Ultimaker is an exception to that, they're all going for the bottom of the barrel, like how cheap can we make the printer? The $500 printer, the $300 printer, the $150 printer. And I love those printers because, one, they're open and they're great tools for learning about 3D printing. But as a production tool, it's not a very reliable thing. And so that's where the sort of differentiation comes in. Yes?
Okay, sorry to interrupt.
Oh, sorry.
We will save these questions for the panel discussion.
Fair enough. Yeah.
We have been sitting here for a while now, and these chairs are made of wood. So I suggest that we take a break now, save your questions for later, and move around, go to the makerspace, go out, get some fresh air, and we'll meet here 3:30.